Welcome to another Chocks Hangar review. Without further ado, let's kick the tires and light the fires. That's the way to take off, isn't it? So, as I say, welcome to another Chocks Hangar review of an add-on for Microsoft Flight Simulator. No prizes for guessing what aeroplane this is. It's the F-14 Tomcat. This went on sale yesterday being the 19th of August 2021. It's I'll put a link in the description to where you can get this thing from, and some other interesting links. It's available from the Just Flight website. It costs £24.99, that's pounds sterling, and it is made by developer DC Designs. For your £24.99 you get two variants of the F-14. You get an F-14A, which this is, that you can see there, which is in VF84, the Jolly Rogers paint scheme. So you get the F-14A and you get the F-14b. More about the differences between the two as the review progresses, but I thought I'd kick things off by just having a quick flight in the thing so you could see the thing in action. So there's the carrier. I'm going to bring it in for a landing on that, so we need to lose a bit of speed. So you can see the speed brakes deploying there and what have you, so that we can get this thing's speed down in order to be able to deploy the flaps. So I think we'll be alright to get the flaps down now. So there we go, we're getting the flaps down like that, and we're going to get the gear down, and we're going to get those brakes in like that, and we're going to make sure that we put that in the landing configuration, and we're going to get the landing gear up as well so that we're in the right configuration for landing. And then let's bring this sucker in. The carrier that you can see, I'll put a link in the description to that. I reviewed that on this channel. That is the Hard Deck Simulations aircraft carrier module for Microsoft Flight Simulator, which puts Nimitz class carriers at various locations around the world, and that is currently on sale at Just Flight's website. There's a 30% discount on it, so if you do end up deciding that you want this F-14 add-on, you can get a carrier for it, which you can operate it from, and as you can see from the opening of the video, it will let you do catapult launches, and it should, providing I don't arse this up, let me do a carrier landing as well, with the arrestor hook stopping me, hopefully. Here we go. So yeah, £24.99 in pounds sterling. Two variants of the F-14, and they are very different in the sim as well. They're not just sort of visual differences. They do fly differently and model the engines differently. Loads of really cool paint jobs. A really good paint kit, and a really good 49-page PDF manual, so that you can learn how to fly this thing properly, and hopefully land it properly, which, you know, I might manage here, possibly. Oh, only just. Flipping it. We got close to the edge of the deck there. I think I caught the last wire there. So yeah, still, any landing you can walk away from is a good one, and any landing that you can walk away from where you can actually use the aeroplane again is an excellent landing, and it would appear that we can use this aeroplane again, so no problem. There we go. I wasn't going to fall off the deck. Anyway, let's have a look at this thing in detail. I just thought I'd start it off with a bit of fun. Okay, so looking at the thing in a bit more detail, here we are at the Payware Macasims Echo Golf Charlie Charlie, Manchester Airport. That's the place that I work, to look at the F-14 add-on in a little bit more detail. So this time we're looking at the other version that you get in the sim. This is the F-14b. and in this case it is in the livery of VF-143, the Puking Dogs, as they were known. If you're wondering why they were called the Puking Dogs, their unit badge on the back is a winged lion, but someone once said that it looked like a puking dog and the name stuck, so that's where that comes from. Anyway, F-14b. Now, again, you can see that it's a very nice model, and what I've got going on here is a lot of the sort of like add-on visual extras that you can turn on or off with this thing. So what you can see is that we've got wheel chocks. They're sort of sinking into the ground a little bit, but they are there in front of the main wheels and the nose gear. And then what we've got is we've got the deck chains, which would be used to secure the F-14 to the deck of a carrier in case the deck was pitching about. We've got the engine covers that are on. We've got the pitot tube covers there and probe covers on the other side. We've got the refueling probe extended. We've got the crew access ladder and the handle step things there extended, and we've got the canopy open, and there is no crew on board. So loads of visual things that you can have on this thing, and that's not all of it. When we have a look inside, what we'll do is look at all of this stuff. So on the subject of looking inside, to turn all that stuff on and off is mostly switches located around this area here. So I can turn the chains off, I can turn the engine covers off, I can turn the chocks off. Now, the one thing that we couldn't see was a GPU. You'll notice that I'm getting the option to turn it off, i.e. it's turned on, but on the external view we can't see the GPU, and that's because I haven't yet hit this thing, the air start, to actually crank this thing up. So we will see the exterior GPU arrive when I do that, when we start the engine. The reason that there is a GPU for this thing is the F-14A and the F-14b didn't have any sort of internal starting mechanism. They always had to be started using external ground power for batteries and stuff like that. So you've got the capabilities to start this thing realistically. There are two other things on there. We'll see those when we get this thing cranked up. That is, you can have the crew of your F-14, i.e. the pilot and the radio intercept officer, RIO, in the backseater if you prefer, have their visors down, all their visors up, and they can either be wearing an oxygen mask or not wearing an oxygen mask. And because in the paint kit you can change the faces of the pilot, so you could put your own face on the pilot and what have you, you might want to be able to see your own face. So it's kind of handy that you can turn the visors on and off and the oxygen masks on and off. So that's where you do all that stuff. Yeah, the crew access ladder is that switch there. So if we look on the external view, you can see that that has now retracted. The refueling probe is interesting. You can see that that thing's there, and you'll notice that what happens with the refueling probe is we're getting an option to retract it there. So I will click that and we'll retract it, and now you can see that the refueling probe has gone back into its recess. But when I put the tooltip over there, you can see an interesting thing about the refueling probe, which is that when you hit that to extend it, what it does is it doesn't actually function in flight, but when you extend the refueling probe, it will add 25% to whatever fuel you've got on board. Yeah. Now, of course, you could sort of like, because the refueling probe comes out, you could have a go at flying up to a sort of like a tanker if there was one in the sim and trying to get the probe into the sort of like shuttlecock drogue and what have you, but it's not actually going to function in the sense of refueling you, but it does sort of refuel you. Now, the other thing that we've got here is you can see canopy close and canopy lock switch. Yeah. So if we look here, you can see the canopy locks and they are back. And what I will do is I will close the canopy like that, and then what I will do is I will hit the locks, so the canopy is locked down. So it's kind of nice that it does that. And also, when you've done that, it's a little bit less in the way of that switch there, which is the start switch. So I'm gonna move the view a little bit, like that. Perhaps not back as far as that. We'll roll it out a little bit, and then yeah, there is the start button. When I start the thing here, you will see the ground power unit appear. But before we do that, it's worth noting that the rear cockpit is also modelled. So when we come back here, all of this stuff for the radio intercept officer, I should say, is all modelled. Now this screen does actually work, and you know, all of these switches work and stuff like that. Now when I say they work, what you've got is the functions that are actually in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Any switches that operate those functions do work, but anything that's a little bit more specialist that the sim doesn't support, the switches can be operated so that they can patch this thing so that if those functions are added, it will then be able to do it. So you can see that we've got a few things on here that, you know, the for arming stuff and what have you, and they're not really going to do much in the sim, but the switches do all operate, so there is the potential for this to be patched with a lot of extra functionality. But this scope and these selection modes and decluttering it and all that kind of stuff, if you want to, you know, play it being Goose in Top Gun or what have you, and searching for targets and all that kind of stuff, you can actually do that. An interesting thing about the modelling on this is you'll notice that there's no pilot there. The way that this thing has been modelled is kind of nice. On the exterior view, there are pilots in the cockpit, but when you go to the interior view, if you've selected that position, it doesn't model the pilot on the interior view. So what you don't get is you don't get sort of arms and legs getting in the way of things when you're in the cockpit view like you do with some add-on aeroplanes. So that's kind of nice. So there's another nice feature of it, that we've got a rear cockpit. Now before I actually go through what all these switches are on the cockpit, there is another feature on this thing, which is and it can occasionally glitch a little bit. It does work, but I've noticed a little glitch with it, and that is if you go on this fuel panel here, what we've got here is the ability to fill various fuel, you know, auxiliary tanks and all this kind of stuff. And you could see that I'm not on half fuel, I'm on 75% fuel. And that is because I was on 50% fuel and I hit that refuel probe and it put 25% again. So I'm on a little bit of extra fuel and what have you. I think I might have been on a bit more than half fuel. Now, the thing that can glitch, but not badly, is this switch here that says payload. You can see that there is a slider here. Yeah. Now I have noticed in the sim with playing with this over a couple of days that very occasionally you can bring up this window and you'll see the word payload there, but that slider won't appear. Now I'm not sure for the reason for that, but if you ever get that happening, you can still manually add weaponry by adding the weights in here and stuff like that, but it's a little bit easier to do it with this thing here, as I will now demonstrate. If you're looking at the cockpit, you'll see the weight drop on this thing. So if we do that, you see that drop like that, and that's because now what we've got on the external view is a crap load of weapons and ordnance hanging off the thing. So you've got Sparrow missiles on the thing, and you've got Sidewinders, and you've got AIM-54 Phoenix missiles on there, and all that kind of stuff, and external fuel tanks and what have you. So you can see Phoenix missiles underneath the thing, and you can see the closer range missiles on the wingtips there and what have you. So we can have all this kind of thing if we want to. I don't know. As I say, this thing is available from the Just Flight website, and there are no constraints on this thing having weapons when you buy something external to Microsoft Flight Simulator. But there is a rule when things are on the Microsoft Flight Simulator built-in store that things can't have weapons on them. Now, I don't know whether this would get around it in that by default it doesn't have any weapons on it. I'm not sure, but whether or not this thing will appear on the built-in Microsoft Flight Simulator store might be a little bit contingent on that. So yeah, it's great that you can do that, but be aware that sometimes you'll open up this window and you won't actually see that slider, but you can get around that by manually typing in. But obviously it's nicer when that little slider appears, because you can just slide that along and get your ordnance on there straight away. So that's another nice visual thing on it. Another nice visual thing on it, which you saw at the start of this video when I said let's kick the tires and light the fires. Yeah, we went to an external view, and what you saw was the nose gear drop to the launch position, and you saw the connector bar for the catapult system on the carrier extend and what have you. This thing here. So normally the oleos are up for land-based takeoffs i.e. conventional takeoffs and landings. But when the F-14 Tomcat was launched off a carrier, the oleos would shrink down a little bit so that it was lower to the deck, so there was less strain on the nose gear and what have you. And you can do that in the sim. So you can do this, boom, you click that, and the thing drops down, and you see, so the gear drops down, and then the lug for the catapult launch system comes forward. So you can do that if you want to. You can land with it like that, but you more properly should be landing with it up with a bit more clearance, because then you've got the bounce for the oleos for the impact and stuff like that. So another nice feature of this, and something that you see on the real F-14 Tomcat. Now, loads and loads of visual fun things on this. DCS designers aren't pretending that this is some kind of study sim. What they say is they want things that are enjoyable, run well in the sim, have got a few things to play around with, are reasonably realistic, but don't require you to read a manual for weeks and stuff like that to be able to get this thing operating. So this thing, yeah, it's got a lot of switches on it, and yeah, it can do some fun stuff, but there is nothing preventing you from hitting Control E or just hitting the start engine on the thing, opening the throttles and flying the thing around and what have you. But it has got a few more whistles and bells on it if you want to explore it. So it is in no way intended to rival something like the F-14A and B Tomcats in DCS world, but then again, it's nowhere near the price of those. If you're looking for a super duper realistic F-14 Tomcat that you can fire missiles off and what have you, the one in DCS world is very, very cool. But this is the Microsoft Flight Simulator, and so it's intended for kind of flying around and having a bit of fun. Anyway, let's have a look at the cockpit and all of the features and what switches work, and then we'll have a little bit of a fly around with the thing, and we'll take the thing up to high speed and what have you, so you can see that. So you can see that this is an F-14B cockpit. Now the F-14A and the F-14B have very similar cockpits. They're not identical because there were some features that were on the A that weren't on the B, and on the B that weren't on the A, and all this kind of stuff. And when we get in the air, we'll talk about the differences between them. But one of them that is very obvious, that tells you that they have realistically simulated the A and the B, is that you can see there that I'm not getting a tooltip for the wing extension override thing there, which is a sort of like wing gloves, and that is because that was deleted off the F-14B, and we're in an F-14B. If that I was in that F-14A with the VF-84 Jolly Rogers paint job that you saw at the start of this video, and I'd have gone in the cockpit, that switch would have worked. So there are differences between the two. It's all explained in the manual. Anyway, let's have a look at what works and what doesn't work. Okay, so TACAN navigation system panel here does not work. This is not doing anything. However, that you can still do that kind of navigation. We'll see at another point in the cockpit. These volume switches are not doing very much. This switch for nav GPS switch does actually work. So if you want to do GPS navigation, you can flip it between those two things there. Similarly, if you want to turn VNav on and things like that, these switches are going to do things, and you can set your minimums and what have you. So that stuff works. We've got automatic direction frequency controls here. So if you want to do ADF navigation, that stuff works. If you want to use an autopilot on your F-14 Tomcat, you can. Automatic Flight Control System, AFCS. Now, you can use keyboard shortcuts for the autopilot in this. You can use these switches here to control the autopilot, plus a couple of others on this side. That altitude hold mode and auto throttle mode there, and your heading select there. So you can use those switches, you can use the keyboard shortcuts, or if you've got a Saytech/Logitech exterior hardware autopilot, you can use that as well. I have tested it with it, and it does work with it, so you've got that option as well. We've got the engine start panel there with all the things for cranking the engines, which we're going to use in a minute. We've got the throttle levers there. We've got the flaps lever there. We've got this thing here, which is kind of like the heart of the F-14's maneuverability, and that is the wing sweep system. Now, the wing sweep's probably not going to work while I haven't got the thing cranked up, so we'll come back to that. But it's worth bearing in mind that this has a guard cover over it that you have to flip up in order to be able to access the wing sweep control on there. It says wing ice engine there. It's not. That is the wing sweep mechanism on there. Note something that might catch you out on this. One, it's got a guard cover on it, so obviously that has to be up before you can operate it. And two, if this guard cover is up, you are not going to be able to alter the flap position on there. So that's the other function of that. You would have to close that down in order to be able to operate the flaps. The wing sweep mechanism on the real thing goes between 20 degrees and 68 degrees, and it does that in the sim as well. And you have got an annunciator up there that goes from 68 degrees to 20 degrees, and because we're swept back at 68 degrees at the moment, that's what it's reading. So that stuff works. We've seen that there's this oleo kneel and extend system here, and we've seen that that works. We've got this thing here for two positions for takeoff and landing. So, you know, if you're bringing it in for a landing, you do that. If you're going to take off, you put it on that. It helps it configure the aircraft correctly. We've got a landing gear lever there. We've got a parking brake lever there. We've got that refuel probe that we've seen that can extend and add fuel to it. You've got spoiler system there. You've got this thing, the wing extension additions, the wing gloves and what have you, non-functioning in the F-14B, but functioning in the F-14A. And then what we've got here is we've got fuel dump turn on. Yeah, there. So all of that stuff appears to be working and does indeed work. Emergency stores jettison, not going to happen. However, we've seen that you can sort of visually do it if you want to. Over to some manual analog gauges, because this is an F-14B. F-14A and B they do have some glass CRTs in them, but they've got a lot of manual gauges. If you see an F-14 cockpit photograph and it's got more PFDs in it, it will either be an F-14D or it will be an upgraded F-14A or B. There is another version of the F-14 which is a slightly upgraded F-14A, which is the F-14A Plus, which has a different engine in it. I'll talk about that when we're talking about the real thing. So we've got analog gauges. So you've got a vertical speed indicator, you've got a Mach meter there, you've got a radar altimeter there, you've got a standard barometric altimeter there. We've got gauges for sort of pressure and all this kind of stuff there. And we've got these sort of tape gauges here for RPM and fuel flow and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's a big CRT in the middle. This is typically set to be a repeater of your head-up display, which we'll see when the thing cranks up. And then down here, this CRT cathode ray tube is for all the navigation modes and stuff like that, and all of this stuff works. So we'll see that when we crank the thing up in a minute or two. More analog gauges. Artificial horizon, which is tumbled at the moment because we haven't got any power on. G meter, positive and negative. Your navigation pointer there. Com radio, nav radio, and transponder. So, you know, it has got a working transponder, so you can use this on VATSIM if you want to. Oxygen levels there. An analog clock if you want to do manual navigation. Fuel quantity on there. Tail hook extend on there. You've got display modes there. I'll come back to those when we've got this thing turned on. And then we've got a warning annunciator panel there. All of that stuff works. We'll see that come on. We've got lights on here. All of those lights work, and we'll see them when we power the thing up. There is some air conditioning stuff on here. There is a pitot heat there and windshield de-ice there. And then we've got master generator there. And that's about the size of it. I think I did spot that there is a typo on one of the tooltips. I think it's this one here. You can see that that's the air dump, and it says dumb rather than dump. Oops, yeah, bit of a typo on there. So dumb cabin pressure, it should be dump cabin pressure. I think that's about the only thing that I found. So yeah, you can do that, you know, put the oxygen on auto and stuff like that. Anyway, let's crank this thing up. So you'll remember that what I said was you can turn a GPU on there like that, but it's not currently appearing because we've not hit the air start on there. So we can't see that at the moment, but we will see it when I hit this switch here. Boom, like that. And now there is the GPU and air start unit there, and that's plugged in, so that'll be cranking the thing up. And notice that the engine covers come off, and now the engines are cranking. There are some interesting sounds on this. Anyone who's worked on jet aeroplanes will know that when the fans blow around in the wind, or when they're going at low speed, you get like a little tinkling noise as the individual fan blades sort of rattle about in the slots when it blows in the wind and what have you, which can be a bit annoying if you're doing a walk around check. I know that from work, but that sound is on there. So there are a lot of cool sounds on here. Notice that the crew have now appeared and this thing is starting up. So notice that the wings swept forward because we've got pressure to the system, and the elevons went level like they do on there, and we're starting to get smoke coming out of the back of that thing there, and then now you'll notice that this is doing it automatically because I hit that air start on there, but you can beat it to the drawer and manually do that switching if you want to. So of course we can see that we've got both engines starting up at the moment, and now because both engines have started up, it's made that GPU disappear. I wish it was that easy in real life instead of us having to haul the things away. You can see that the cockpit is lighting up now. So it actually doesn't really matter whether we hide or show the GPU because it's gone. What I can do is I can now show you these two switches here. So if we have a look at the crew on this thing, you can probably see that they've got visors down and they've got oxygen masks on. But if I come here and click that, like that, now their visors are up and now their oxygen masks are pulled out of the way. So, you know, kind of nice feature there. So that's what that thing is. Notice we're getting some annunciator warning lights on here. Because all of this stuff is now actually working and what have you, and I've already turned the lights on in preparation for doing this, what I can also do is I can show you the night lighting on this, because very nice it is too. Here we go. I will change the time of day to night time, and we'll see the night lighting in the cockpit, which is pretty groovy. Yeah, and it's the same in the back cockpit. It's pretty groovy. If I get that thing out of the way, there is your exterior lighting, including the slime lights, the green position lights that you can see on there, and all of the sort of nav lights and strobe lights and all that kind of stuff. So all of that is working. So if you merrily want to fly this thing around at night, you can do. But obviously, whilst we're reviewing this, it's probably a little bit more helpful to look at it in the daylight. So I'll put that back on daytime. And of course, because I've got it on daylight, we don't need all of these little lights on. So it wouldn't really matter too much if I left them on. But I can turn these things off if I want to. I'll just jink the view down a little bit there, so that we can get to the switches. Oh yeah, I didn't put the landing lights on, but you can see that you can actually do that. Now, in the cockpit, I'm going to have to move that up now a little bit. Come on. Try to remember all my keyboard shortcuts here. So you can see head-up display there, which functions. The up-front control panel here, none of these switches work because this relates to the weapon systems and what have you, and obviously the weapon systems are non-functional, but the other stuff that's on there does work. So wing sweep mechanism there, currently reading 20 degrees with the annunciator. I'll sweep the wings in a minute back to 68 degrees and you'll see that that thing works. Angle of attack indicator works, as does this little thing here with the lights. If you're familiar with the carrier aircraft of giving you your approach angle and what have you, where that thing lights up or that thing lights up or it lights up in the middle, that works. The brakes indication works on there, the whiskey compass works, and obviously the head-up display works. But the head-up display can be difficult to see in the bright sky, you know, when you've got bright clouds and stuff like that. So it's replicated down here. And then what we've got is we've got a main navigation screen, which is very, very similar to the one in the rear cockpit. Now, so hood brightness, we can play around with that. The glass shield brightness on there, and then we've got this, the heading selection and the brightness there, and then you've got that map information modes, which can change. And then we've got all of this stuff down here for various displays and what have you. So there, takeoff mode, you can see that that is changing the head-up display and giving us suitable information for that. Cruise mode, so that gives us a little bit different. Air-to-air mode there, so we get a different read on the CRT. Air-to-ground mode, if you're doing the F-14 Bombcat, which is the ones that we used for ground attack in later years on the F-14. And then we've got landing mode on there, where it's going to help us a little bit with the head-up display there. So since we're going to be taking off, I'm going to put that on there. I'm going to turn that off on there. Now we've got TACAN and other stuff related to navigation on there. So yeah, you can use all that. We've got a declutter mode for the HUD and a few other bits and bats that you can turn on here, and all of these, so you can see all these switches are working. Change the brightness of the pitch ladder and all that kind of stuff. So all of that kind of stuff works. Notice that the radio is now working and the transponder is working. So if you want to fly this on VATSIM, yes, you have a transponder. Notice that these tape gauges are actually working as well. Notice that we've got some annunciator lights on there. So we've got the warning about the left inlet and the right inlet, and the ramps and stuff like that. And then the windshield heat is on, the parking brake is on. So it's like, oh, don't want the windshield heat on. So you can see, turn that off and that thing goes off. Turn the parking brake off, that thing goes off. So you can see that all of these annunciators are actually working, and that's fine. If this control column is getting in your way a bit, you can hide it like that so that you can see this CRT a bit better. None of this stuff, none of these switches on the yoke actually do anything, because they would be kind of related to the weapon system, and obviously the weapon systems aren't going to work in Microsoft Flight Simulator because it isn't a combat simulator. If you want to shoot things, you're going to have to get DCS and the F-14 in that, which is very good. Now, with regard to the realism of the cockpit, this is a pretty good representation of an F-14A/B cockpit. There are some things about it that are not perfectly 100%. If you go and look at a picture of an F-14A or B cockpit, you're going to be able to find things that are slightly different, but not a million miles away. Now, for example, if you want to spot some differences, go and get a photograph of an F-14b cockpit, and you'll find that these things here are slightly differently sized and slightly differently placed, but they're not a million miles away from it and what have you. So yeah, it's not a millimeter perfect model of an F-14b cockpit, but it is pretty goddamn close, to be honest. Yeah. So some people are saying, oh yeah, it's not as good as the DCS F-14 cockpit. It's like, well, it isn't 3 times the price and what have you. And there's another thing worth bearing in mind. One of the things these DC Designs want to do is they want the thing to run smoothly, in the flight simulator. So they sometimes back things off a little bit graphically and what have you for sensible reasons, and they've certainly done that here. So I think this is a pretty good looking cockpit, and I think it's reasonably accurate to the real thing, and there are certainly enough switches on the thing to have a bit of fun with it. So let's check the external view. There are the wings, and they are swept forward. So if we look on the annunciator there, you could see that those things are swept forward and the annunciator's there, but we want to see these things moving. So guard up this thing back, and what we'll see is that this transits in time with those wings. So that's when you get the things back like that. And then if we come back down here, notice from the sort of pilot's position, it's very easy to accidentally hit the cover on there. And your tooltip for the wing sweep mechanism actually reads anti-ice engine on it. So you have to kind of bring your mouse out to about here to be able to do it. Note the gotcha, the flaps lever is not going to move when you've got this guard up. So if we go and get that wing swept forward again for the takeoff, and then we close the cover, and we can see the annunciators reading 20 degrees. We are now going to be able to deploy flaps. So you can see the flaps lever will now move. And we've got flaps for takeoff. Now, with regard to control surfaces on the F-14 Tomcat, this is both the A, B, and D versions, and any other version that you care to come across. It's sort of interesting, the F-14. The controls of it on it are conventional, i.e., you use your stick left and right to roll left and right, and backwards and forwards to increase and decrease pitch and what have you, and the throttle works in the traditional sense, and the rudder pedals work and what have you. However, the actual controls on the F-14 that make it move are a little bit different. It doesn't have ailerons on the wings. What it does is I'm going to move the stick left and right here, and what you'll see is that the F-14 has elevons, i.e. the elevators are also ailerons. So they were to control the roll rate. But you'll also note that there are little spoilers that come up on the wing. So I move the stick to the left. The elevon pitches the left-hand side down and the right-hand side up. But what it also does is it puts a spoiler up on the left-hand wing to help that get a little bit less lift, so to improve the roll rate. Notice that what looks like it would be the ailerons on the F-14 are in fact dirty great big flaps for the thing, which can be used at small settings. They can be used for combat. At larger settings they're used for landing and what have you, or you could use them for takeoff off a carrier. Notice there are slats on the front of the thing as well, and there were some like sort of inlet and wing gloves and what have you on earlier versions of the F-14. The rudder pedals are completely conventional, although of course it has twin rudders to give it a little bit more pointability in combat and what have you. So you can see the rudder pedals moving then when I'm moving my rudder pedals on the thing. So pretty conventional in terms of the way that you fly it. So we'll just give it a bit of a look in the cockpit and make sure that we're all good to go. So I've got that in takeoff mode. Nothing particularly unusual going on there. Everything's all selected all right. So nothing particularly complicated that you need to do to get this thing in the air. So let's get this thing in the air and have a bit of a fly. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about a little bit about the real plane as we get this thing supersonic. So on the external view, like that, and we'll taxi to the runway. So I'm releasing the parking brake, and you'll see that this thing is very maneuverable, which is useful, unlike the real thing, because obviously you've got to taxi this thing around on the deck of a carrier, and the F-14 is not a small aeroplane by any stretch of the imagination. I think it was the largest fighter interceptor to be going off a carrier at the time that it was actually created. That might have been surpassed by the sort of Su-27s and Su-35s and the Su-24s and stuff like that now. But it's certainly the F-14 is a very big plane, so it's kind of handy that it's very nicely maneuverable. And I'm not even hitting the toe brakes there. I'm doing that purely off rudder and nose wheel steering. So don't worry about maneuvering this thing round at a small airfield or on the deck of a carrier, because you are not going to have any problems with it at all. Now, with regard to the manual, as I say, the PDF manual is 49 pages, and it explains about how to fly the thing, speeds to fly it at, how to land it, all of the stuff about how the paint kit works, bit of a history of the plane, differences between the F-14A and F-14b. The main difference between the F-14A and the F-14b is the engine. There are some other things on it, but what it means in reality is that the F-14b, this version, is a little bit easier to fly than the F-14A. You know, like they say, never buy the A model of anything. And that is actually reflected in the sim. The F-14B in the sim is actually a little bit easier to fly. So, you know, they haven't just gone for lookalikes and not tweaked them in any way and what have you. These are two different planes that you're getting here with two different behaviours. They're not massively different behaviours, but they certainly are different. I'll get this thing lined up on the runway. And I'll just hit the brakes. And we'll go in the cockpit. So there we are, lined up for takeoff, and we're in the cockpit. And what we're going to do is we're going to get this off the deck, and we're going to go supersonic with the thing, and we'll land at Liverpool Airport. It is not going to take us long to get to Liverpool Airport. Liverpool from Manchester is about 35-40 miles up the road and what have you, and we are going to be there in a matter of maybe a minute or something like that, at the kind of speeds that we're going. So without further ado, let's get this thing in the air. Now I'll put this on the external view so you can hear the engine, because this is another good thing about this F-14. The engine sounds on it, they've done a really good job. I'll just give you a little bit of a preview of that by winding the engines up and down. Pretty good, yeah? Anyway, let's go. So this thing accelerates like crazy. And gets off the deck really, really quickly. And I'm going to get the gear up, and I'm going to get the flaps up, because this thing is going like a bat out of hell. We're already doing 300 knots. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the wings swept back. So there we go. Wings swept back. We'll get that closed. And so there's the wings coming back. Now, the reason it was taking a while for the wings to come back was because the flaps were retracting, and obviously, you know, it needs to get the flaps out of the way before the wings come back. Anyway, let's get back on that engine and really give it some. So I'm just, I'm going to make sure that we're heading more or less the right way for Liverpool. And you can see there that we are doing 670, 680, 690. We're just passing 700 miles an hour. Still accelerating and what have you. So this thing's really, really going like a bat out of hell. 750 miles an hour. Or knots, I should say. Giving us a little warning there because we're getting low and we haven't got the gear down or anything like that. 770, so yeah, you're not going to have any problems breaking the sound barrier on this thing. And you'll notice that at these kind of speeds, even with the wings swept back, we've got a very good roll rate. So there you go, right in front of us, Liverpool Airport. Like I could say, didn't take very long to get here. Now obviously what I can do is I can get this thing open and I can sweep the wings forward, and we make sure that we close that, because obviously at some point what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get the flaps down. We would want to get that in its landing mode. Now then, a little bit about the real aeroplane before we bring it in for a landing. The F-14 was designed as the replacement for the F-4 Phantom, because the F-4 Phantom didn't have an internal gun when it was designed for the Navy. The Air Force versions did, but what they found in the Vietnam War was that it was having difficulty engaging more maneuverable MiG-19s and MiG-21s, and as a result of that, they developed the Top Gun Weapons School and the Air Force their Fighter Weapons Training School. But they also did a program where they were going to develop a fleet defense interceptor that was going to be the replacement for the F-4 Phantom, but it was also going to be a little bit better at close-in dogfighting. Now, initially, the US government told the Navy that they weren't going to get the budget to do what they wanted to, and they were told to use General Dynamics, who were intending to do a variant of the F-111 Aardvark, which was going to be the F-111B, which was going to be their new fleet defense interceptor. And obviously the US Navy were not very happy about it, and fortunately for them, General Dynamics didn't have a great deal of experience in doing Navy aircraft. So what actually happened was, because they were struggling, the government assigned Grumman, who created a lot of Navy fighters in World War II and after World War II, to help out General Dynamics. So Grumman did a lot of research work, and eventually the idea of doing an F-111B as a carrier interceptor was dropped. But by that time, Grumman had done a lot of research work on a very, very large swing wing aircraft that was capable of carrying the AIM-54 Phoenix missile, which the F-14A was intended to carry, and was also capable of carrying the AWG-9 radar system. Now, these are big systems, and AIM-54 Phoenix missile and the AWG-9 radar system added about 8,000 pounds weight to the aircraft, and it was intended to carry about 16,000 pounds of fuel. And that's why the F-14 is a friggin' massive aeroplane. But when General Dynamics left the program, and then it was left to Grumman to develop something, they were afraid that the outgoing administration who'd approved stuff were going to be replaced by an incoming administration who would then cancel the program. So instead of building a prototype for the F-14, what they did was they went straight to production. So they went to the Navy and went, there you go, there's your F-14. So all of this was happening in the late 60s, but the first flight of the F-14 prototype, or F-14A, first production one, was in late 1970, and because they didn't go through all the prototype stuff, the thing was actually in fleet service by 1973. So it did actually very briefly serve at the end of the Vietnam War on the USS Enterprise, which I think is that CVN 65. So yeah, even though, you know, like the F-14 was developed as a result of experiences in the Vietnam War, it was the Vietnam War went on for quite a long time, so it actually ended up serving at the end of the Vietnam War, which is kind of interesting. So it went into fleet service in 1973, and the problem with the F-14A was that it had to use the TF-30 engines, which were going to be on the F-14B, and they were a little bit problematic. They were prone to compressor stalls, and that would make the F-14 possibly enter into a flat spin. If you've seen the Top Gun movie, you'll see that in that movie, Tom Cruise's Maverick character has a compressor stall from flying through someone's wake and goes into a flat spin. And that's not bullshit. That's what would happen with the F-14A. So the F-14B had replacement engines and had some aerodynamic changes to it. So the F-14B has the General Electric F1T-400 engines. So that's the difference between the F-14A and the F-14B. There are some aerodynamic differences and a few switch differences, but the main difference is the engines on the thing. So that's the F-14A and the F-14B. And if you want to know why it's called the Tomcat, it was named after Admiral Thomas Connolly, who was one of the main guys on that program where they were trying out the idea of the F-111B, and he was the one that went, this just isn't going to work using an F-111, and he was very sort of fundamental in getting them to go with Grumman's design. So they named the F-14 the Tomcat in honor of him. They were considering calling it the Alley Cat, but they decided that was a bit yeah. So combat-wise, the F-14 in US Navy service has got 5 kills to its name over its operational period. It's shot down 2 I think Su-22 fencers. It shot down 2 MiG-23 floggers, and it shot down a MIL-8 HIP helicopter. Now that sounds like, you know, it's not been involved in a lot of combat, but you have to bear in mind that it's a fleet defense interceptor, so most of the time, you know, it wouldn't be going over land and engaging stuff. And the fact that it didn't get involved in a lot of combat is because it was such a good aeroplane that if people turned the radar on in an F-14 and lit up any aeroplanes from over 100 miles away, those planes, if they had any sense, just turned around and bugged out. So the fact that it didn't shoot down many planes in US Navy service is not because it wasn't any good. It was because it was so good that it scared the crap out of everyone and nobody wanted to go near the thing. However, another Air Force did use the F-14. That was in 1976. The US government sold the F-14 to Iran, pre-Islamic Revolution Iran. when the Shah of Iran was the ruler. So they sold them 80 F-14s in 1976 and 720, I think, AIM-54 Phoenix missiles. And then 3 years later, in 1979, the Shah of Iran was deposed and it became an Islamic State. So effectively, what the US did was they kind of put F-14s in the hands of the enemy, because Iran let the Soviet Union look at the F-14's AIM-54 missile system and its radar systems and all that kind of stuff. So that was a bit bad. But in Iranian service, the F-14 was incredibly successful, and still is. They're still operating the F-14. The US Navy retired their F-14s in 2006, but the Iranian Air Force are still operating a few F-14s, and they were actually operating them in combat as recently as 2015 over Syria, where they were escorting Russian bombers in that conflict. But in the Iran-Iraq war, Iran claim, excuse me, that they've shot down up to 160 Iraqi warplanes with their F-14s. Now, that might be bullshit, but, you know, it's not complete bullshit, because independent sources have been able to confirm that at least 60 of those claims are genuine. And one guy, Iranian pilot who sadly died in a car crash a few years ago, Brigadier General Jalil Zandi, who's an Iranian F-14 pilot, claimed 11 kills in the F-14, making him the F-14 Top Gun, much to the dismay of the US Navy. And of those 11 kills that he claimed, 8 of them have definitely been confirmed, and the other 3 are very probable. So, the F-14 might not have shot down a lot of planes in US Navy service, but it shot down a crap load in Iranian service, and they are still using it. There is one other F-14 user that's ever used it, and that was NASA. They used one as a chase plane. I think they might have retired it now. So there's only been 2 air forces that have used it: the US Navy and the Iranian Air Force, who used it as a land-based fighter, and then NASA, and that's your lot. Nobody else uses it. Anyway, let's bring this thing in for a landing. So I'm going to get the speed brakes open to slow us down a little bit to a suitable speed to deploy the flaps. And then we're deploying the flaps, and we'll get the brakes in, and we'll drop the landing gear. And then we'll bring this thing round for a landing at Liverpool. Now, of course, we could start looking on that those scopes down below for the airport, but we're not too far away from it, so we're not going to worry about that too much. And there you can see the runway ahead. So that was a little bit about the history of the F-14. You know, obviously, it's not telling you everything about it, but you know, it is an indication of what an impressive aeroplane it is, and it, you know, the fact that it's still in service with Iran. And it's still a very, very formidable aeroplane when you consider that its first flight was in 1970. So that means it's a 52-year-old aeroplane. Is incredibly impressive. And no less impressive in the sim. $24.99 from the Just Flight website. I'll put a link in the description below. And as I say, just to reiterate, you get F-14A, you get F-14b, you get a really nice paint kit with it, you get a great manual, and as you can see, this thing runs great. It's getting great frame rates. I'm coming in to this airport. This is one of the souped up airports in the sim, and I took off from a payware airport, and I've got most of the graphics on up pretty high, as you can see, and this thing's, you know, usually staying at around the fixed frame rate that I've got of 30, and sometimes it's going a little bit past it to 31 and what have you. So this thing runs really, really well. Looks great, has a lot of whistles and bells on it, has a lot of potential for great paint jobs on it. You can, you know, add your face to it and things like that, you know, if you want, you know, to start attacking the paint kit, you know, and it's easy to put your own name on the canopy down the side in the paint kit as well. So that's another fun thing that you can do. You can operate it from a carrier if you want to. Check the description of this video for information about that carrier that I used at the start of the video, which I also reviewed on this channel. and you know, there you go. So you know, you can launch it from a carrier, have a bit of fun with it, or there we go, look at that, butter smooth. Or you know, you can have fun launching it off regular runways and stuff like that if you want to. And there it is, slowing down, and we'll bring this thing in. Now you can see why this thing has an arrestor wire, you know, because I don't know what speed it was going to be at, around about 150 or something like that. Maybe a little bit hot, but you know, this thing, you know, the brakes on it are quite realistically modeled. You know, it's not, you know, stopping in an instant. So we'll bring this thing in, and what we'll do is get the flaps up like that, and then that of course is one of the other nice things about it. The engine sounds on it are really great. The night lighting's great on it. I think the texturing's really nice. I like the modelling on it too. I like the fact that you get two variants of the thing and they are different. And I like the way it flies. It's got a really, really good roll rate. Even with the wings swept back at high speed, it's got a great roll rate. It turns well and stuff, you know, so it does kind of handle like you'd expect an F-14 to handle. And it's not the hardest thing to land with a bit of practice and good fun. And let's be honest, who doesn't want an F-14 Tomcat in their flight simulator? Because it is just a really cool aeroplane. So there you go. That's it for this one from Chuck's Hangers. It was a bit of a long one, but you know, it's a plane that I think deserved a little bit of a serious look at it and what have you, which is why I did the start of it with the takeoff and all that lot for those people that are impatient and just wanted to see the thing flying. Anyway, like I say, check the description for additional information about things that were in this video and stuff like that. And beyond that, take care everybody. Look out for another video soon. And in the yeah, there is another one coming up that I'm going to be doing later this week. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you like this kind of thing. But in the meantime, take care. Bye.